Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life, not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. You can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/vmspod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my monthly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of this show. So visit patreon.com/vmspod and patronize me. Now, last week was flat out exhausting, guys. I had lots of meetings and business pitches during this week-long event in New York City where I never sleep well, but I have to stay there because if I tried commuting in and out, I'd never make it to half the meetings. Plus, I had a big FDA negotiating session sandwiched in the middle there, which meant 4:30 a.m. departure from my hotel room to the train, down there, back, etc., all capped off on Thursday night by a big black tie dinner, which might sound awesome, and in fact was kind of awesome because, the organizers, normally they just have a little address, then they have their big guest speaker. Last year was Tony Blair, this year was Ron Howard, and a Q&A with the president of the association. This time around, they decided to warm up with stand-up comedian Mike Birbiglia, who did not have any stand-up material that was remotely related to this particular black tie crowd, but was really hysterical. There were a lot of moments that basically I was busting out laughing and the rest of the room was silent, which I always take as a good sign. But anyway, after 4 days of meetings and sleeplessness, it can kind of be a drag. So lucky for me, I got to start off the week by getting in a double-barreled podcast. And this is what you're going to get to listen to this week. Bob Stein and Ashton Applewhite were kind enough to visit me at my hotel shortly after I got in last Sunday. So I was able to get in this conversation and then get into work mode from there on. Now, Ashton's name may be familiar. I recorded about a year and a half ago with her when she was working on her new book, This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. And that book came out last week from Networked Books, and I am mighty impressed by it so far. I've only read 2 chapters in prep for our conversation, but it's awfully good and awfully important. If you didn't listen to that previous conversation with Ashton, she is an activist about ageism and the way that society tries to make olders invisible. And it's an important movement because, we're all going to get there if we're lucky. So I invited Ashton to celebrate the publication and find out how we got there from a year and a half ago. But I also wanted to talk to her partner, Bob Stein. Bob is this weirdly seminal figure in digital media, and so we sat down to hash out a little of his history and outlook before bringing Ashton on. They collaborated on the publication of This Chair Rocks, which is something else we'll talk about. First, I ought to tell you a little more about our guests. Bob basically wrote his bio for me, and here it goes. I got bit by the electronic publishing bug in 1979 and haven't looked back since. I spent the first 15 years expanding the notion of the page to include rich media. The 2 companies I founded, Criterion and Voyager, managed a lot of firsts. The first films with commentary tracks and supplementary sections, what's widely regarded as the first commercially viable CD-ROM, the CD companion to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, referenced in Edward Tufte's Visual Explanations and referred to by Alan Kay as, quote, the first piece of digital content worth criticizing, as well as the first electronic books, Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Trilogy and Martin Gardner's Annotated Alice in 1992. After that, there were a bunch of years spent on toolmaking, and in 2004, the MacArthur Foundation gave me a huge 5-year grant to explore the question of what might happen to publishing in the Internet era. With that grant, I started the Institute for the Future of the Book, where my colleagues and I conducted a bunch of exciting experiments around the question of what happens when you locate a text in a browser with a live dynamic margin. The upshot of this work was a new company, Social Book, aimed at building the first truly post-print publishing platform. We've been developing the underlying principles for almost 10 years and actual code writing for more than 3. Social Book is browser-based, and it works. So, like I said, media visionary or digital visionary, which, again, is not a term I take lightly. And as such, I was really excited about getting to talk to Bob. Ashton writes, I didn't set out to become a writer. I went into publishing because I love to read and didn't have any better ideas. I had a weakness for the kind of jokes that make you cringe and guffaw at the same time. My boss kept telling me to write them down, and the collection turned into the best-selling paperback of 1982. I was a clue on Jeopardy! Who is the author of truly tasteless jokes? Answer, Blanche Knott. And as Blanche, I made publishing history by occupying 4 of the 15 spots on the New York Times bestseller list. My first serious book, Cutting Loose, Why Women Who End Their Marriages Do So Well, was published by HarperCollins in 1997. Ms. Magazine called it Rocket Fuel for Launching New Lives, and it landed me on Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum Enemies list. It also got me invited to the board of the nascent Council on Contemporary Families, a group of distinguished family scholars. I belong to the artist network of Refuse and Resist group that originated the anti-Iraq invasion slogan and performance pieces titled Our Grief is Not a Cry for War. As a contributing editor of IEE Spectrum magazine, I went to Laos to cover a village getting internet access via a bicycle-powered computer. Since 2000, I've been on the staff of the American Museum of Natural History, where I write about everything under the sun. The catalyst for Cutting Loose was puzzlement. Why was our notion of women's lives after divorce, visualize a depressed dame on a bar stool, so different from the happy and energized reality? A similar question gave rise to my new book, This Chair Rocks. Why is our view of late life so unrelievedly grim when the lived reality is so different? I began blogging about aging and ageism in 2007 and started speaking on the subject in July 2012, which is also when I started the Yo, Is This Ageist blog. Since then, I've been recognized by the New York Times, National Public Radio, and the American Society on Aging as an expert on ageism, and I've been published in Harper's and Playboy. In 2015, I was included in a list of 100 inspiring women, along with Arundhati Roy, Aung San Suu Kyi, Germaine Greer, Naomi Klein, Pussy Riot, and other remarkable activists who are committed to social change. Ashton's book, This Chair Rocks, A Manifesto Against Ageism, was published in March 2016. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Bob Stein and Ashton Applewhite. It's a generic opening, but tell me about the future of the book.
The future of the book, to me, is getting to be less and less an interesting subject.
Yeah.
I wrote a piece a few years ago, an op-ed for an Italian newspaper called "The Future of the Book is the Future of Society," because I think the answer to both is we really don't know, except for one fundamental thing, which is that in the last few hundred years, we've thought of reading and as something you do by yourself. But what we're discovering now in the era of the internet is that all media, whether it is movies or games or reading, that all media consumption is going social. And it's going to be completely different when that's the case, when it's not something you do by yourself, but something you do with other people.
I'd make a words with friends joke, but that's ultimately what it is, right?
I think that we can't actually know quite what it is because it isn't here yet.
What have been
in other words,
symptoms?
For example, it could be that it could be something you do with people where you are together making the outcome, or it could simply be where you are sort of walking through a path together and experiencing it. I mean, there are a lot of different directions that future creativity can take, we just can't quite imagine it yet.
What led to your futurism? The seeming nature of just being in these sort of epochal moments for the advances of digital media? Besides accident.
Mostly accident.
Okay.
You know, but I had a very bifurcated history, which was up until my early 30s, I was working as a full-time, very left-wing, sort of Maoist revolutionary. And I stopped at a certain point in the early 1980 and basically, had to integrate myself back into the, into the world. And I don't like saying it that way. Just getting a job. Let's put it that way. And
so you retained the Maoism, but
ideologically, I wasn't. It was not a break with it ideologically. Okay. I just had 3 kids, and revolution was much, much further off in the distance than I had the stomach for. It's a personal decision. But anyway, so I was looking for something to do, and I got sort of turned on by this work that they were doing at MIT in interactive video. Mm-hmm. It just seemed like a really. I had a stepchild who had this astronomical IQ, but he didn't read, and I just knew that the way to get to him was going to be some sort of complex array of materials. He was going to need. He was going to need video, he was going to need audio, he was going to need interactivity, he was going to need to have a piece of paper that he could fold. He needed all kinds of different ways to get at something that were other than pretty much than reading.
Is there a sense that you feel like the rest of the world has caught up to that? That's become more of a mode of perception for us?
I think we all underestimated, me maybe a tiny bit less than everybody else, but I think we've all deeply underestimated how long the shift is going to take from the print era to the digital era, and that it's unlikely that anybody who's over 50 today, will be around when suddenly people wake up and that the print era is literally behind us and over our shoulder.
Does the Marxism help with that in terms of seeing things in longer historical trends?
It's interesting. I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, it should, and it does, but
because hypercapitalists tend to think minute to minute.
But the time frame of Marx is nothing compared to the time frame of McLuhan. Mm-hmm. McLuhan was the one who really understood that these deep changes in how people communicate work themselves out over centuries, if not decades, or decades, if not centuries.
Background in McLuhan
not
before
at all.
Starting this?
No.
I thought that was the case.
No, and as a publisher, if I could do one thing, it would be to find somebody who had enough vision and understanding to do a synthesis of Marx and McLuhan, because they clearly understood 2 very different parts of a very complicated problem. But sitting here now and looking at things change, it looks to me like the McLuhan's time frame really looks right. That it's not, it was 150 years from the perfection of the printing press by Gutenberg. It was 150 years before the novel emerges. Don Quixote, everybody regards as the first novel. It takes 150 years. It took 40 some odd years just for page numbers to appear in books. I mean, it takes a long time to really understand what a new medium is all about. And VR is just coming. I mean, that's the...
Yeah, and reading up on you in the last couple of days reminded me of being 18 or 19 and reading the Whole Earth catalog in the late 80s and early 90s, and Jaron Lanier, and we're all headed towards virtual reality, and realizing sometimes it takes a technology time to catch up with our ideas of what the future's going to bring.
I think it's absolutely there. A friend who I'd worked with on a project in the 90s, Xin Wang, who collaborated with Laurie Anderson. Xin was in town recently, and he put on the most remarkable 2-hour demo for me of VR stuff. Some stuff he's been working on with Laurie, and some stuff that he's just had from other people. And it was palpably exciting in the same way that interactive video was in 1980. It was palpably exciting because you could imagine a whole range of things that could be made that you, ordinary human, would actually want to look at.
Do you think we've gotten better about the science fiction projections of what technology will bring in terms of, just things are going to emerge that we just didn't predict, or the uses are going to be somewhat mundane, but they're going to transform us, as opposed to interstellar travel, etc.
I was at a celebration recently of Neil Stephenson's Diamond Age.
Yeah.
And it was a group of people who were just sort of in love with this book. Mm-hmm. But then when you listen, it was an amazing book, but it's 25 years ago, and it is so deeply rooted in the idea of what a book is, in the sense that yes, the pages of the book are alive, and yes, they're smart, but it's just for her. It's just a one-way connection, right? Where in fact, the real book of the future is everybody's going to be connected in it. And so, in that sense, science fiction, it's what's the old saw about the one thing that no science fiction book ever predicted about going to the moon was that it would be televised.
Yeah.
and so, which was undoubtedly the most important thing about it. So I don't think we're getting better.
And I know science fiction is not about the future, it's about the present, etc. But I wonder, in terms of all the grandiose visions we had for virtual reality and what it was going to be, as opposed to once it actually gets applied in the real world. I've seen Bob Mankoff walking around with a Google Glass at shows, and that's kind of a...
it'll almost certainly not be good.
Yeah. And was the iPad a... this is what I've been waiting for moment for you, or a too consuming, not enough making? Which was my initial reaction when I saw it. I'm like, that's nice, but that's for people who want to receive. And
I think for me, the first Power Book, that would have been 1991 or that was much more the aha moment. Mm-hmm. But yes, it had a screen, but it was it was flat, and you could carry it around with you. And it was that, it was my friend Florian Apple sent me a prototype of it. And my friend Florian Brody, who was at the Austrian National Library in Vienna, was visiting, and Florian ripped it out of my hands, and the machines came with HyperCard at that point. He ripped it out of my hands and came back about half an hour later, and he put the first 10 pages of Paul Bowles' The Sheltering Sky into a HyperCard stack, and he showed it to me, and, we both looked at it, and we went, oh, we're there. Electronic books are actually going to happen.
And I took my side route into Victory Garden and the whole hypertext book, the Stuart Moulthrop thing. I remember, again, coming out of that, for me, college was that techno-utopian 89 to 93 stretch where things seemed like they were going in a certain direction, and then we...
I think what sometimes people don't understand when they look in hindsight at what were dead ends, and Story Space to me is a good example, or a lot of things I did, which is we didn't necessarily do things because we thought they were going to be bestsellers.
Yeah.
We did them because we thought it was an interesting problem, and we wanted to see what would happen if we did it, and that some people might appreciate the effort. And I think that, I think a lot of things we did, we knew weren't going to go anywhere. But how do you get anywhere if you don't actually play around a little bit?
Do you find yourself still experimenting like that?
I mean, the last big thing I've worked on was we built this really quite remarkable platform for people reading together. And we've never released it officially, but enough people have used it, we know that it's fantastic. It works. And so that was a big experiment, and I never could get the money I needed to really bring it out in the world here. But, you know, probably the press I spent the most time showing it to, university press, was MIT. You know, and I just saw that they've produced a really quite gorgeous mechanism for conversation in the margins of articles. It's nowhere near as sophisticated as what we did, but it's quite a lovely implementation. And there are lots of other parts of the equation where we had it mapped out in a way that was pretty ambitious. And we're starting to see, now ideas that we've put out there are coming back in much lesser form, but they're marketable.
We do live in an era of good enough. I mean, streaming video is certainly, it's not HD quality, but what the hell? At least
it's a print era problem.
Yeah, that you're trying to make the best.
Yeah, I mean, people come out of the print era basically don't naturally take to continuous evolution.
And certainly, again, the book is a fixed object as opposed to what happened when the Kindle came out and we started to get emails from Amazon saying, we corrected a bunch of mistakes in the book that you bought. You won't notice them. So
no, I think it's the very hardest thing about working within the book world, but trying to maintain a sort of future worldview, is that it's very hard to move it. It's very, very intransigent when it comes to...
Is that in terms of people just wanting to hold on to their jobs for a few more years? Or is it a greater, this is just how it's always been done? Therefore...
I think it's where the angst of the times is being worked out. I mean, they're not stupid guys or women. I mean, they can see the handwriting on the wall, but
they had to collude with Apple to fix prices to keep ebooks from eating their own lunch.
That was probably a good collusion. I mean, the world would be better actually if Apple had won that case.
The value of it aside, the problem is it's an antitrust violation to do that. So, in my new day job, I have to be very cognizant of these things. So it was done for a good purpose, but.
Agreed.
Although that's why 2 years ago I was a trade magazine editor, and I looked around at 42, 43 and thought, this isn't going to last another 10 to 15. The economics of this aren't going to last another 10 to 15 years, and I don't want to be 52, 53 with no job. So I became a lobbyist for the pharmaceutical industry. But all things considered, it made sense at the time. But yeah, it's seeing the level of disruption that we're experiencing in so many fields.
Let me put it slightly differently, which is that humans can't stand the idea that the big change isn't going to happen on their watch.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing built into our way of thinking that makes it easy for us to think about things that are going to happen post our own mortality.
Sure.
And so that makes it so that if a change does take place over 200 years, let's say, you can't actually see the end of it, which isn't a bad thing. Yeah. But I'm always a little bit surprised that we don't get more. All we really see out of Silicon Valley and the Ellisons and the Musks and the Bezoses, as far as I can see, is some twisted sense of immortality that they're looking for with their sort of ceaseless creation of machines that
we have to save mankind and take us to Mars or put us all into.
I mean, I'm all for space travel, by the way. I'm not, but it's like there's this is all this is deep in their psyches, and they're working it out on ours.
How much of that do you think just comes from childhood? Just being raised with a space program and that glamour of technology, and then contrasting that, how did your childhood kind of affect you where you are politically, or how did you become who you became in that?
I became. Who knows what all the deep things were, but I went to Columbia, and I was there in the '60s. I mean, it was, you couldn't have taken a. I mean, the classic story was, I went in as a sort of do-gooder liberal, and the summer of '66, Juan Gonzalez, who I was running a community center, and I'd recruited Juan Gonzalez from the school newspaper to work with me at the community center. And Juan and I took a course at the School of Social Work with Richard Cloward, and he told us something that, here we were, sort of basically do-gooder college kids. He explained to us that the reason white people were poor wasn't because they weren't as good as somebody else. It was because of the society that we lived in. And that, he talked about, there's this phrase at the time that black people were culturally disadvantaged, and he made us see that how racist that was, and that the really culturally the culture that was really disadvantaged was white. Yeah. And anyway, so that, suddenly there was a system. Suddenly there was a reason why the U.S. was at war. Suddenly, everything sort of fell into place for me. And so that about 2 months later, I became a founding member of SDS when it was formed at Columbia. Mm-hmm. And, one thing leads to another. And
you later went on to run Revolutionary Books, or a bookstore in
I did sign its first lease, Revolution Books.
Okay. Do you have a favorite, besides that, favorite lost bookstore in New York? And do you lament the loss of?
Well, yeah. It's not a very interesting one, perhaps, but it was for me. The bookstore of my youth was the Doubledays on 57th Street, which had listening rooms for LPs and downstairs paperbacks and upstairs cloth books and a little sales section. And I would go in once a week, and I would buy, a record and a book, and that went on for years. And that's always been my idea of it was a browsing bookstore.
Yeah, which again we largely have lost, which actually makes me wonder about the reading as social process that you talk about, and the virtualness of it as opposed to the face-to-face, which is part of why I do these conversations face-to-face. I get asked every so often if I can do them by Skype, and I'm just convinced the other person will be goofing around on the internet the whole time, probably because I would be at the same time.
That's what we do.
Yeah. Is there a degree that what effect do you see from again, the lack of bookstores? The way I put it is the lack of record stores. The way we used to hang out in record stores. I don't know where young people especially, physically congregate. Is there a way to just hang out and shoot the breeze? Do we lose something in the process of that being gone? Or?
I think those of us who are fortunate are able to live in two places. We live online and we live face-to-face, because we can afford to travel to see people we love. And you tend, when you do that, to spend quality time with them, not in front of your screens. But the rest of the time, I personally am extremely comfortable living a lot of my intellectual life, in Facebook. I have just a shitload now of friends who I really trust, and when something interesting is going on in the world, I never had the corner bar. Even in my lifetime, sure. Even as old as I am, that was never really something that was part of growing up in my community. There wasn't such a thing.
Did it take you time to to find that level of trust with people virtually? Because I still find it a little difficult if I haven't talked to someone face to face to really that the screen is somehow mediating in a way that you're seeing who they want you to see, which I know we all do in person also. But was that a learning curve for you at all, or were you pretty at ease with it?
I'm pretty comfortable meeting people. I don't. It's. I was I was a lurker on Facebook for at least a year. I just watched.
Yeah.
And all I did was friend people. I mean, all I did was accept people's requests. And then one day, a friend wrote something really banal, and I went, "Wait a minute, I'm actually involved in his life remotely." And I started realizing, like so many things in life, you get out of it when you put into it. And I started putting something into it. And it's something really sweet happened over a New Year's time. There, I wrote a message to about 10 Facebook friends and saying that I really was just basically putting them all together because in my mind they were really good Facebook citizens, which to my mind means that they talk about serious stuff and they talk about it respectfully and seriously. They have some cultural bone in their body, and they do put up the occasional, picture of a dog or, that they bring their whole self to the table, and that's unusual, and it makes the place much more interesting. But
what was their response like?
Oh, it was great. They all became each other's friends, and
that to me, it's a funny thing. I started mind mapping the guests for this show and where they all come from. A huge amount of them come from our friends Jesse and Larissa, just people who meet in person, and all of a sudden, oh, you should talk to, and it just starts proliferating that way. So it is that weak links. I guess it was the weak social connection and the strong ones, and the weak ones tend to be the more effective because they're not as in person, but they end up meaning more in someone's life. So.
I'm not sure I got that, but
strong connections are the people you see day after day after day.
Oh,
where the weak ones are, and again, strong and weak isn't a value like that. It's simply
Facebook is interesting. Yes, there are 10 people who you can count on will pretty much interact with you about anything on this subject.
Yeah.
But then the surprises in Facebook to me are when so-and-so who you haven't seen pop up in forever suddenly makes a really smart comment implying that, oh, they're always there and they don't necessarily interact. For me, it has a very architectural feel to it. I mean, you really start to see the potential with them buying Oculus. Because if they can build Second Life,
I was just going to say it's Second Life.
If they can actually build Second Life, the movie that Spielberg's making, what is it? Ready, Set, Go.
Oh, the Ernest Cline. I forget his name. Yeah, but yeah.
Or 1, 2, 3.
Ready, Player One.
Player One.
Yeah.
Right. That's where we're gonna be. I mean, and I don't. I need to really fight hard against value judgments. Mm-hmm. Do you know?
Yeah, like I said, it means strong and weak as it's just a sociological term.
No, I know. No. I didn't. I know. I knew that. Yeah. I'd gone off another.
Yeah. On the direction. Other hand, how long did it take you to get Twitter? Like when you first saw it, did it make any sense to you whatsoever? Because it took me the longest time to figure out what the hell it was there for and how to interact with it.
It still doesn't.
Good. Okay, I'm glad because
I can use it. I know what to do, but I'm not. I don't like the 140 word limit. It's not 140 character limit. It's not. Yeah. It's not an interesting problem to me.
Yeah.
If I wanted to write haikus, I would, but I don't. And the other thing is that I understand people lap it up for news, especially in their related small groups. But I don't need that news that quickly. and I don't have a social group that needs it. Although I think I would probably use WhatsApp if I did.
Is there a sense of I can't bother keeping up with, app after app after app? We all fall into that. It's,
Yeah, I'd like to think that I'm just being more selective.
Sure. There's a degree whenever I hear the next thing that's supposed to be the big network, we've got enough. I have enough networks for now.
It's also, I think that, for me, Facebook is a home of sorts, and I don't mind investing in it. I don't see any, I don't feel like I'm missing something out on the Instagram city, as opposed to, they're both terrific. Mm-hmm. And I've worked really hard over the years to build up a set of people who I want to, sort of be with.
Who were you reading as a kid? What did you read? Do you remember formative, anything that was really...
Well, the formative stuff when I was a kid was horrible. Davy Crockett, landmark biography series, which was all about celebrating sort of white marauders of one generation or another, male marauders.
As is our wont, yeah.
So I had to work pretty hard to get out from under that.
Were your parents particularly
political? My parents were Stevenson liberals.
Okay.
My mother's proudest possession is her autographed card from Adlai Stevenson.
And they worked in publishing also?
Hmm.
Oh, okay. Were they within the book world?
My father was a gem dealer, and my mother was ran a bookstore. But then in their 50s, they became publishers' reps.
Mm-hmm. Following their son?
Well, I helped them get a job. But.
I never thought of doing that for my parents. I don't know. It just never occurred to me. But,
Maybe you've never had to.
Yeah, could have with my old man. But, all things considered, it's for the best. I want to ask about Wikipedia in relation to your
mm-hmm.
encyclopedic projects from the 80s onwards, which I'll start off with an anecdote. In 1995, when I was looking for a job out of grad school, I interviewed at a hotel directory in Secaucus. They wanted a wordsmith, which I put in quotes, thank you, for this massive, 15 or 20 volume annual hotel guide. And immediately, again, having been raised on that Whole Earth Catalog second edition way, I said, but why is this being printed? This whole thing should be, at the time, a CD-ROM. I didn't realize within a few years it should all just be a database online. I did not get that job. They did not want to hear some, at that time, 24-year-old telling them that this entire model doesn't work. What was it that you saw or didn't see within publishing and then within the encyclopedia, as you'd mentioned, that made you start to see it as a CD-ROM or start to see the potentials for a non-print way of organizing information?
The thing was, the knack I've had, I realized, was sort of
still accidental.
Not all that interesting, actually, but that I've sort of been able to know when a new medium is sort of just good enough to make something that I would like.
So you say that's accidental, but that's actually, I think, a very rare trait, because most people simply don't.
And so when I saw I dragged myself to a auto mall in Chicago, where I was living in 1979, and they had these huge honking Laserdisc players that had all these microprocessors inside, and you could control the video with a little handheld device. And I went, oh, wow. Because to me, they were just pages.
Yeah.
But they were being displayed on a television screen, and for the first time, the print actually, you could read stuff. So I said, this is just what I've sort of been interested in all these years. It's just in a slightly different form, and it's good enough. And so I just sort of started off trying to find a handhold.
Yeah, see, that's, I guess, the the thing that I'm trying to understand, what that interest is that you see, because again, think of everybody else out there who did not, walk by, see that Laserdisc player and think, this is how I could change.
Look,
without tooting your own horn.
Trust me, this won't be tooting my own horn. I mean, whether it's because I'm an idealist, or something else, I do get off on trying to think about, how things could be better. Mm-hmm. And I spent a lot of my early, adulthood trying to understand how things could be better in terms of teaching and education, sort of the formal education period. And when interactive video came around, I was raising children, and I got really interested in what kind of tools, because as I was explaining earlier, I had a son in particular who really cried out for new tools. And when I saw interactive video, I went, oh, this would make everything great for Morgan. And so just sort of followed that. And that turned out to be interesting.
And the project you're currently involved in?
Day to day right now, I'm working with Ashton, my partner of almost 23 and a half years now, to publish a book. And it's an important book. And we'll bring Ashton on in a second, but let me say some things that she won't feel so comfortable saying. The name of the book is This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. And it's the result of more than 8 years of Ashton's really sort of deep dive into a set of problems out of which she emerged with this understanding that a lot of the reasons why we fear getting older is because of a whole fabric of myth about what older life is and could be. Anyway, she's written this fantastic book calling for, trying to help launch a movement around ageism. Anyway, Ashton's been published by 4 of the big 5 publishers, and we offered the book to them this time around, and they didn't get it. They didn't understand the potential of a book in this era,
right,
to work off of a platform and to build a platform and to be part of the building of a movement. They could only see it as a book that went on which shelf at Barnes & Noble's does that go on, not how the book actually operates in society, not how why a lot of people went into publishing in the first place was because they wanted to have an effect on society. And the failure of the publishers to understand how, especially now, you can work things out with a book like this in a way you never could before. Anyway, Ashton decided to self-publish. So we've been working for the last year on bringing this book out, and its pub date is this coming Tuesday, 15th. And it's been an unbelievably interesting education.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what did you learn from that process? How many things did you learn?
Well, by far, and it goes absolutely back to the whole theme of the first part of this discussion about things becoming social, is that self-publishing you could not have more of a misnomer than self-publishing. Mm-hmm. At last count, we're up to over 40 different vendors whom we are working with to, quote, self-publish. Yeah. But that's nothing compared to what we're starting to see, which is to really publish a book today, especially one which has a broad social component, means to rely on networks that you are connected to. And we all have a range, an array of networks, and bringing the book out there to each of them as appropriate and to enlist their help, and then to start getting the letters that Ashton's getting from people saying, I love this book, what can I do, or what can my organization help to do in Minnesota, and so that potential is so exciting, and it's the sort of thing that the publishers, they're too corporatized at this point.
They just have to move units. Yeah. At least the majors. I'm sure with smaller guys, but then you're trading off
the smaller guys. Marketing and the smaller guys don't have the model.
Yeah.
They're on the coattails of the old model. There are some companies that have breathtakingly different models than the big publishers, but that's breathtaking
within a narrow range.
Within a very, 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 very narrow range.
Yeah. I do have one guest I interviewed who started a publishing company that gives away its books and insists that if you pick up a copy, you make a donation to a charity of your choice and give the book to somebody else, which he considered the absolute opposite of publishing. Of course, there's no money in it to be had.
But he also makes his money as a consultant.
Yeah. He does perfectly fine with the day job.
I find this to be a little bit disingenuous.
Yeah, he said, I will, but as far as the publishers go, and he gets good authors,
Ashton, want to sit here?
Phil's driving.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he's finished with you yet.
Because we still have to ask, do you write in the margins?
I do. It's one of the things that really bothers me. Here's a quick story. I was coming back from Amsterdam probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I was reading a pirated copy of Rabbit Run, and I was reading on a Kindle reader on my MacBook, and I went to make a note, and I said to myself, oh, wait a minute, I stole this. Amazon won't keep my notes for me.
Yeah.
And I closed it, and I've never pirated another book since, because I realized that it's all because of annotation.
And in print, you were always writing in the margins?
No.
Oh, you never did?
No, because I've never had any sense. I mean, like when I marked up the Hunger Games, I did it very consciously for my granddaughter Penelope, who turns 6 today, but maybe 5 or 6 years from now, 7 years, she'll read the Hunger Games with my annotation. I have much more confidence that I can get her my Kindle notes than that I could find the copies of the book. Okay. And send it to her and everything else.
Yeah, I just think, and I always had incredible reticence about ever writing for a different reason than that. Mine was that I would go back years later and realize what a moron I was when I was writing in my copy of The Crying of Lot 49 or something like that. But Clive James, one of his greatest books, Cultural Amnesia, is driven solely by the quotes and the things he underlined and the marginalia he put into books, and I don't think he really gets the digital side of things, but when the ebook movement happened with the Kindle, were you again a rapid adopter, or was it still they're loaning it to us, they're not selling it to us? Was there any IP or copy issue with that?
That's such a transitory problem.
Yeah.
I mean, no, it didn't. I mean, I like the very, very first thing I think I ever read as an ebook would have been when we published Picture Dorian Gray, and I remember sort of writing a note in it and realizing that it was the sort of thing that being raised when I got raised, books were precious. We weren't supposed to write in the margins. That was defiling the book.
Yeah.
So for me, being able to write in the digital margin was the second thing I noticed about how fantastic ebooks would be.
The first being
that I could sit there. I was sitting on an airplane when this was happening, and my legs were crossed like they are now. I had a drink in my hand, and the book was sitting on the little tray. And all I had to do to turn pages was put my finger down. And I went, wow, for the first time in my life, I am reading without having to hold on to the book. And as somebody who, liked to read when I was eating by myself, that was huge. That was like a sea change, in terms of behavior, where you didn't have to make this choice all the time between holding the book or holding the...
I have my Kindle Voyage has a little origami cover, so it stands up on its own. I can just do the little tap, and which I like to think isn't a sign of laziness, but a sign of how deeply involved we are with the book, I guess. But do you ever feel the need for online sabbatical? Do you ever just decompress or disconnect for a period?
As Ashton will attest, I don't have a problem being deprived of signal. Mm-hmm. In other words, if we're at the bottom of the Grand Canyon for 10 days, I don't get angsty because I'm not logging on.
Yeah, if the Wi-Fi is down, that's not a reason to throw stuff through the window.
Right. But I like being online.
Yeah.
It was to me, the big shift that's taking place is from we're leaving the era of the individual and entering the era of the collective.
See, I knew that Marxist thing was going to come out again, but yeah.
But I'm sorry. What was I going to say
before I cut you off? The individual into the collective.
Oh,
as far as a conscious shift.
And so, to me, the internet as a whole, or social book, the platform that we've been working on, these are mechanisms for collaborative thinking. Basically, if you, me, and Ashton discuss something deeply, we will get to a more interesting place than if each of us was off on her own. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of the place I've gotten to. I mean, a little while ago, I wrote a guy on a listserv I'm on wrote a long piece explaining why he now has gone back to print books and doesn't open up his computer an hour before he goes to bed, and all these things about needing to go back and to reclaim that quiet space of reading. And it bothered me and bothered me and bothered me until I finally wrote an essay called Welcome to the Liminal Space Cafe, mm-hmm. in which I suggested that the reason why reading was boring wasn't because of all the distraction. It's because reading as a private act is no longer satisfying a lot of our media desires, which have grown to be communal and social. And that, we're used to pages where our friends tell us what they like and what they don't like. Yeah. And so suddenly in a book, you're all by yourself. And I know a lot of people think that that's the be all and end all of humanity, is to be able to be by yourself. But I don't buy that one. And so to me, when a book, even like a book like Ashton's, goes online in a social space, suddenly it gets 10 times more interesting, because my friend Jeremy writes in the margin and says, this is bullshit. And then my friend Diane says, no, this is why this makes sense. And so when those points of view start to triangulate, then you really start to get some deep thinking going on.
Which I'll have to think about. Ashton, get over here. Bob, thanks so much for being a guest on the Virtual Memory Show.
Thank you.
A year and a half ago, we spoke. You were working on this book then.
I was buried pretty deep in it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you were typing in the picture that I took of you after the show.
If only typing were writing.
I know. This isn't writing. This is typing. Yeah. And Bob has talked a bit about the process of deciding to quote unquote self-publish. Talk about it though. What did you learn over the course of both researching and writing the book and now bringing it into print? What's been the Ashton education?
A steep curve on many fronts. I think, I will add to the fact of the mainstream publishers being clueless about the digital landscape. They were all afraid of anything to do with aging.
Yeah.
And I have come to dub this age cooties, because the culture is so profoundly biased against late life that it's just like this curtain of gloom comes down when the reality is so very different.
I think I mentioned to you, the guy who's going to be on the week before you, Burton Pike. Yeah, I was at this Festival New Literature event at the Goethe Institute. They had me interviewing these young German language authors they'd brought over, and this 85-year-old guy got up to accept this translation and contribution to German Lit Award, and he started talking. I thought, holy crap, I have to sit down with that guy and find out, the expanse of life that this that he's seen.
Imagine an age-blind world as just a goofy thought experiment. If we just looked at each other for what that person was like.
Well, then everyone would think I was a moron. But that's okay. He hasn't learned anything. I don't understand.
There is that.
But what's the goal with the book? How are you trying to reach?
This week, this is actually Pub Week. So the short-term goal is to ask as many people as possible to hit buy on Amazon on Tuesday, which is pub date, in the hopes of getting a spike, which we think we can parlay into media appearances. We've also been sending it out to everyone you can imagine for advance quotes and press, and it's
Did anyone surprise you in a good way?
Oh my gosh, we've gotten amazing advance press. We got this beautiful a beautiful Anne Lamott quote, because her saying of hers is the epigraph to the book, which is, "We contain all the ages we have ever been." And maybe you can, it's radio, but it's like sort of like abstract nesting dolls of a small figure growing into a large one. And I got the following blurb out of I did an audiobook. The people who produced it had worked with Lamott. They offered to send it to her. Oh, this is not the copy with the blurb in it. She gave us a fantastic quote which started out, "Wow, this book really rocks." Yeah. So, what is each thing worth? It's hard to tell. It's just really hard to tell how it's going to play out. I'd like to sell a ton of copies. In my insane pipe dreams, I want to, help shift the culture and start a zillion conversations. And the response from the, tiny number of people who have read it has been honestly over the top.
What did you learn by dyeing your hair gray?
I didn't learn much. I learned how strongly women feel about dyeing their hair. And I've learned that it's kind of fun to dye your hair. So I had to be 62 before I came into that knowledge. I've learned how powerful, I knew this before, but it's driven home yet again, the social forces to be invisible and to attempt to pass as someone younger than yourself, which is really profoundly analogous to a person of color trying to pass for white, or a queer person trying to pass as gay, because the price of not conforming is so steep. It is a sensible strategy that I understand. But we need to look differently and more generously and more accurately at ourselves as older people, because it's, am I a lesser version of myself because I'm older? Is my goal to remain what I was when I was 20? What kind of insane, self-corrosive, unattainable goal would that be?
I'm down. It was my 10th wedding anniversary this weekend, and that led to a bunch of people posting pictures from the wedding on Facebook, and I realized I look better and I feel better about my life now than I did 10 years ago, which is kind of odd. But, I looked around and thought, I have my stuff together much, much better than I did at 35.
Or you could be in a trough. It goes. Most of the data shows that people are unhappiest at midlife in their 50s, that's actually the trough.
Oh, geez, thanks.
So look forward to. Now you have, if you're doing this well in the trough, just think it's going to be,
or I'll be dead by
straight
60.
up. But that's just, one of a zillion things we just associate aging with loss and decline. And, the physical stuff is real, no doubt about it. But there's so much more. There's so much more to it.
I think the police are coming to get us.
Police are coming to arrest the age police.
This is the one downside of doing a show in Midtown Manhattan. I realized once I walked in the door, I thought, oh, this might not be the best place for us to do a show.
Well, on a Sunday afternoon, there's not too much wild action on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah, you'd think, but,
So, So I'm incredibly excited, because if you can't be excited in the 2 days before your pub date, if there is a window for delusional expectations, why not now?
Do you know of any reviews lined up or not? Has anyone said anything?
The Washington Post is interviewing me. I don't know if it'll be an actual review. There will be a story out in something called the California Health Report tomorrow. I was profiled on Next Avenue, the PBS site, on Friday. But not we had any real book reviews, no. And the big ask for anyone who reads this and reads the book is to please post a review on Amazon or Goodreads.
How much of, well, I would say Bob's, but I'm sure you share the mentality between you, which is why you get along so well. Both the social media and the social reading aspect, like the Goodreads sort of thing. I kind of figure you're in sync about that. Otherwise, you'd be at each other's throats.
No, we're actually pretty different.
Oh, really?
I mean, I'm a writer. I'm more of an introvert than Bob. He would like to live, collectively, and everyone work collectively. And I sort of like having my little armed cell somewhere, with the Rottweilers and the machine gun nests. I like to be able to retreat. But I think Bob's right, no doubt about it. He's been so insanely prescient over so many decades about what's going to happen. And I think that if what I want to do is help catalyze a million conversations, how thrilling to be able to have, a partner who's going to help figure out how to do that. And, this social book platform is one way to do it. We'll figure out other ways as we go. So if I want to shoot out like in a wildfire, like little trickles of connection or flame, that's, to light people on fire.
Okay. And you can have a podcast that nobody listens to. That'll certainly, I'm just kidding. Somebody listens to it. I think my mom. But yeah, that'll help promote.
Absolutely. Every bit helps. You have been always, very supportive of what I'm trying to do, which I greatly appreciate.
I love the cause,
We're self-publishing. We have this poster that says self-publish together. So with people feeding a Xerox machine, it's pretty. It's going to be, it's in my newsletter. You'll see it. And, so we are self-publishing together with all of our friends.
Based on this process, regardless of outcomes, is that something you would do again? If you had an idea for another book, would you? Oh my gosh.
I find writing a book so hideous that I seem to manage a book every 20 years. So I'm not even going to think about answering that question for a full decade.
If I'm still running this.
But do I feel like self-publishing is the right decision? Yeah. Absolutely 110 million zillion %.
What did you learn in terms of your ability, what it meant to sit down and write like this? Because this is a different sort of book than you had done previously.
Well, it's not actually that different. I mean, I wrote a book about women and divorce that also involved a lot of interviews, but it involved making sense. I mean, the hardest thing in this case was just that it is such a huge, huge topic. I mean, aging is living, and discrimination is discrimination. And how do you, and I had my personal experience, and a lot of reading, and how do you mold that into a treatise? And
I've only read the introduction of the first chapter, so I can't tell you did a great job of it, but I'm trusting,
Oh, how is it so far?
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of facts in there, but there's also a lot of my own personal voice, I think. And I learned that
chapters are at the end.
Oh yeah, the good stuff comes later.
I'm proud of myself for sitting down every day and working on it all day, every day, if I could.
But not for another 20 years.
I don't like it. Writing a book is so hard.
Just get an assistant. Just dictate.
Just dictate. Yeah. Well, a lot. I do read it. I read the tricky bits aloud to make sure they sound okay. I'm really glad I did it, and I'm really, really because I feel like, I mean, of course I've thought up new stuff since I wrote it, but almost every smart thing I have to say is in there.
I mean, you didn't need to do this book, but when everybody told you you did, it became by far the easiest and most efficient way for you to step up onto the platform you wanted to be on. I remain convinced that there are other ways you could have done it, but not as easily and as elegantly as you're doing it.
Well, not under my own terms.
And you don't need to write another book now, because now you'll be on the platform and you'll be able to speak without having to write a book, which is such an archaic.
Yes.
It's so archaic.
Benchmark. Yeah, I mean, I do feel that I've found my life's work, that's for sure. And I feel very lucky to have done so.
Congratulations. I'm still trying. I mean, I consider this to be, what I love doing, but...
I mean, it's so interesting. The more I think about it, the more rich a topic it is.
I hope it's a big success. I'll push it with my 5 listeners, and we'll
Thank
see
you.
where it goes.
You've been a big help already.
Thanks, Ashton. And that was Bob Stein and Ashton Applewhite. You can find out more about Bob's work at the website futureofthebook.org, while Ashton's website, This Chair Rocks, has plenty about her new book. Speaking of, go order This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism from your favorite bookstore. Amazon has it in both print and Kindle formats. It's carried by Ingram, wholesale distributor, so you can get it at a regular bookstore if you hate Amazon. The important thing is go buy it. It's an important work. Ashton's publishing model means it's going to depend on the interest of the audience to get the word out. So order This Chair Rocks by Ashton Applewhite, because before you know it, we're all going to be olders if, we're that lucky. After our conversation, as is my wont, I asked each of them, so, who are you reading? And if you want the answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the show so you can get access to our new monthly podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. You can do that at patreon.com/VMSpod or at paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for supporters of the show, including that podcast, patron-only blog, series of ebooks that I want to launch, some live events, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. And if you don't like Patreon, go to paypal.me/VMSpod and make your donation that way. And if you do, you'll get access to the same material through fearofasquareplanet.com. which is password protected, so don't go there to try to steal all my stuff. A special thanks go out to Paul W. Jones, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Andrew Mason, and Zach Martin for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We got a full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. As far as expenses go, this episode was recorded at the hotel where I was staying on business, so there wasn't really any added cost as far as the podcast is concerned. Except I did have to make room in my suitcase to accommodate a mini recording studio, which could have been better filled with some of my coffee-making gear, which would have saved me from having to go get coffee over at Urban Space. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's more my addiction than yours. So anyway, our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. David has a reunion project going with his great 80s band, David and David, and you can find out more and support that by visiting facebook.com/DavidandDavidMusic. And that is it for this week's Virtual Memories show. Thanks so much for listening. Next week's a special and weird episode, recorded this weekend at a book launch party for 25 Years of Tomorrow. Dan Perkins, also known as Tom Tomorrow, asked me to interview him on stage at the party, and we had a fun follow-up to our August 2015 conversation when he was first launching the Kickstarter that would end up producing 25 Years of Tomorrow. It's a neat conversation, lots of audience interaction, different tone than some of our regular episodes, a lot more lighthearted, and I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. And until next time, you can subscribe to the show and download our past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories show on Twitter at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories show, and leave a rating and review for us. That'll help build a bigger audience. Until next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.